Welcome to the Big Bass Podcast. My name is Terry Battisti.
And I'm Ken Duke. Our producer and engineer is Nathan Benson. The title of this episode is Bolonis, Miracle on Ice. And it's about the Massachusetts state record largemouth bass that was caught through the ice in the winter of 1975.
Yeah, state record had been caught a lot of different ways. Drilling a hole through the ice to catch one is generally not on the high percentage method list. But if you're fishing in Massachusetts in February, that's probably your only option.
And when you hear about the size of this fish and what an outlier it was for that region, I think you're going to be impressed. You might even want to invest in an ice auger. I know I'm going to be getting one, and I live in Florida.
So what do we know about this angler, Walter Bolonis? Ken, can you tell us something about Bolognes?
I can. Bolonis is an interesting character, obviously state record holder, and that's what he's best known for. But Walter Stanley Bolonis was born on January 10th, 1922 in Bridgewater, Massachusetts. His parents were from Poland, so Walter was a first-generation American. He only made it through 2 years of high school. He enlisted in the U.S. Army in 1942. That would have been after the war started, after World War II started. He was 20 years old at the time, and he got discharged after the war ended in 1945. He served as a private, never apparently rose to a higher rank than private, and he was listed as being 5'5" and weighing 136 pounds, but 33 years later, when he caught the state record in Massachusetts, he looks quite a bit heavier. He worked in Brockton, Massachusetts most of his life, and he worked mostly in a shoe factory, but some censuses list him as being a painter. And Walter died on September 23rd, 1990 in Brockton, Massachusetts. So basically lived his whole life in Massachusetts except for the time he spent in the military.
Yeah. And, only getting to private, I mean, that was, 2.5 years that he was in the military. So that's, and it was wartime. So, I mean, it's probably, par for the course. And after being in the war for 2.5 years, who wants to re-enlist, right?
There you go. Especially during World War II, when you were at a significant chance of being shipped overseas and being in real harm's way.
Yeah.
Terry, when we talk about big bass and state and world-class bass, we're usually not talking about wintertime. We're usually talking about that pre-spawn period early in the year. But in Bolonis' case, in the case of this Massachusetts fish, we're talking about pretty much the dead of winter.
Well, yeah, I mean, there was ice on the lake. I mean, like you said, he drilled through the ice. I mean, it's you always hear of people catching bass through the ice that live in Wisconsin and Minnesota, and they're maybe 3-pound fish, 4-pound fish, 2-pound fish, and stuff like that. And then there's a lot of states that have actually a restriction on how big the hole can be. Like
I didn't know that.
Like Idaho, the biggest hole you can have is 8 inches, I believe. And
I had no idea.
Yeah, but evidently, there's other states that you can put a much bigger hole in, and he would have needed it to pull the fish of this caliber out of it. So
yeah, an amazingly large fish.
Yeah, I actually went into the regs and looked to see if there was a hole size, maximum for mass, and there isn't. So.
And probably there wasn't in 1975 either. That's probably an era before they got that detailed. As we know, regulations get more detailed over time, more specific, more demanding.
Yeah.
But apparently nothing restricting the size of the hole. Walter Bolonis might have drilled in the ice or cut in the ice back in 1975. The day he caught this fish, which was February 13th, 1975, was colder than average. The high temperature that day, Terry, was just 30 degrees, so still below freezing. The low was 13 degrees Fahrenheit. He had a north wind of 17 miles an hour that I got to believe would just cut right through you, and it was mostly cloudy, so not even any sun to help warm things up a little bit.
Yeah, I've ice fished quite a bit when I lived in Idaho, and it's not fun. And we did it without shanties like they use in the Midwest. We were just out there on the ice in the wind if it was blowing or what have you. And, I can drink whiskey at home.
Well, but the kind of ice fishing you're talking about is so radically different than what Walter Bolonis was doing. I've not ever been ice fishing, and my dream in life is to never go ice fishing, for what it's worth. I'm a Florida guy. I'm a soft Floridian, but Bolonis was just out there on the ice. He didn't have this big sled with color TV,
the shanties,
heater in there and stuff like that. Yeah, he didn't have one of these fancy ice shanties that he pulled out there.
Yeah,
he was just drilling a few holes in the ice and using those tip ups.
Yep.
To which in some areas they call a trap or a tip up line. And he had these areas he habitually worked on the lake, which was called Samson Pond. And guess what he was using for bait, Terry? I think you know.
Yep. It wasn't cheese. It was shiners.
Yeah, cheese is strictly the preferred food of the big California largemouths.
Right.
Here on the East Coast, where a bass are bass, we prefer golden shiners when we can get them. And Bolonis was using a large golden shiner. That's the way it was described. We have no idea how big it was, but let's guess it was probably somewhere between maybe 3 and 5 inches, which would be bigger than a perch or a lot of the fish that you would expect an angler to be targeting under those conditions might eat, but would be a great bait for a pike or something like that.
Yeah.
And apparently that had been a slow day for Walter Bolonis. He had been out there for 3 hours without a bite. And what he told the media afterwards was he was just about to call it quits and head in for the day.
Yep. Yeah. And what happens? He drops his final bait down, gets bit, and lo and behold, sees this big head, come up through the ice. And he said that he went from being cold to sweating profusely, which I guess I'd probably do the same thing if I, had a bass of that caliber come through the ice. And what pound test line was he using? I mean, there's all sorts of those questions that will never get answered. But, when I was fishing through the ice, we're fishing for perch and stuff like that. They're real line shot. We're using 4-pound and 2-pound line. But, evidently if you're fishing in pike-filled waters or something, you're fishing heavier line. So,
yeah, I don't think I recall an instance where it was reported what size line he was using or anything like that.
Yeah.
But the one thing I remember, and I first read about this story, I think like you did, when I was a kid, when I was 12 or 13 years old, and this story hit Bassmaster magazine, the one quote I remember from Bolonis, and seeing it again as I dove down the rabbit hole for this episode, it hit me again and brought me right back to that time, was Bolonis's quote. He said, "Call it intuition if you want, but I decided to cut a bigger than usual hole in the ice that day."
Yeah.
You believe in miracles? Yes!
Yeah.
Perfect.
Which, evidently he probably wasn't using an auger. He was probably using a spade. And you've never done it before. Augers are really nice, but spade, cutting a hole in the ice with a spade sucks. But, yeah, he cut a bigger hole in the ice, and thank God he did. Or else he wouldn't have
I've
gotten
used
that
an
fish
auger
out.
a lot to dig fence post holes
Yeah.
in my days growing up on a farm.
Yep.
But never to cut through the ice. So I don't have an experience for what that is.
Uh-huh.
But it's a great thing that Walter Bolonis cut a larger than average hole through the ice that day, because the fish he ultimately pulled through that hole is going to blow everybody's mind.
Yeah,
Tell them
so
about the fish,
let's talk about the dimensions of this fish. Okay, first off, its weight was 15 pounds 8 ounces. Its length was 28.
Outrageous. We're talking about New England here. We're talking about Massachusetts. We're talking about almost rock throwing distance from Canada, and he's got a 15.8.
Yeah, and what's going to blow you away is when the biologist aged the fish, they aged it at 14 years old, which does not make sense at all. Maybe it was a super fish, freak fish. I have no idea. But we've talked about the California fish, them gaining anywhere from 1.5 pounds to 2 pounds a year. That fish was gaining a pound a year. I mean, I don't know. We would have to talk to a biologist, but is that typical or atypical of a fish in the Northeast or the northern, latitudes? It just seems kind of crazy.
I'm trying to recall. As I recall, at one point anyway, the oldest bass that had ever been certified was a fish from New York that was in the upper teens or maybe even low 20s in age, based on the otolith and stuff like that, the way they measure it. And that fish was only 6 or 7 pounds. This fish that Bolonis caught at 14 years old was 28 inches long.
Yeah.
And had a girth of 23 inches.
That's insane
and
too.
That's a massive fish, folks. 15.8 is a heck of a fish from Florida.
And we're going to have the fish up probably right now, for you guys to look at. You look at that fish. I mean, it was a damn good looking fish. Something that you would expect to see out of Texas or California.
Say it. Say it.
Maybe Georgia.
Oh. Say it.
Florida.
Thank you.
I mean, it looked like a 15-pound fish. And when we ran the length and girth measurements into the calculator that's on the website, the Big Bass Podcast calculator, it came out at 16.4 pounds, which is pretty damn good for a model. I haven't actually.
Yeah, that's within that margin right there.
Absolutely. And this is a giant bass, and not only that, but it outweighed the previous record by like 2.5 pounds. So,
and ordinarily, jumps like that worry me. They trouble me.
Oh yeah,
I don't
absolutely.
like it. Mm-hmm. But there are enough factors about this fish that I feel good about it. There's not a ton of ugly speculation or smoke around this fish.
Yeah.
There's not. There are other outlier, extremely large fish coming out of Massachusetts. Glenn Lau, the great underwater cinematographer and student of bass behavior, once told me that there was a band that ran along the East Coast where he believed that larger bass were capable of growing for various reasons. And rather than get into those here, I'll just say that Samson Pond in Massachusetts was well within that band. And what is amazing to me, and this is really kind of a snapshot of time back in 1975, Terry, but you go back to 1975, this is before all the Florida bass introductions in states like Alabama and Mississippi and Louisiana and New Mexico and so forth, and Texas.
Yeah.
This fish at that time in 1975, that gave Massachusetts the 5th largest state record largemouth in the whole country. It was behind only Georgia with the George Perry World Record at 22.4, California with the Dave Zimmerly fish that weighed 2015, Florida with a Riley Witt bass from the 60s that weighed 19 even, and South Carolina with a Paul Flanagan bass from Santee Cooper in the 40s that weighed 16.2. Those are the only fish in the country, the only states in the country that had a bigger state record largemouth than Massachusetts, and that's outrageous.
It's remarkable. I mean, outrageous, remarkable. What adjective do you want to throw at it? I mean, yeah, it's crazy, but I don't think anybody back then would have scoffed at it, and nobody did scoff at it. It was just another big bass, right? Yeah, it was a teener out of Massachusetts. But now there's so much controversy with every fish that's caught over 15 pounds that, nobody knows whether to believe anything.
And in some cases, you don't have to break double digits to create controversy.
Well, that's true too.
And we look forward to getting into those states down the road. By the way, it's been great to get emails from folks who've been watching and listening to the show who are concerned about their state record or who have questions about their state record. We will eventually, if we live long enough, get to them all.
Yeah.
But nowadays, talking about how Massachusetts ranked 5th in the whole country in state record largemouth size. Now there are a lot of states that have surpassed Massachusetts, and it's entirely because of the introduction of Florida bass. Now Massachusetts ranks what? 14th or something?
14th or 15th, something like that. Yeah. Yeah, it's 14th.
And Yeah, you got bigger bass from help me here, Alabama,
Arizona,
Texas, Arizona,
Mississippi,
Arkansas,
New Mexico, if you believe that. Yeah.
Louisiana. But yeah, again, Massachusetts ranks 14th instead of 5th. That's how far it has fallen in the overall stature because of the introduction of Florida bass all around the country.
Yeah. And in my eyes, it's just going to keep getting lower and lower and lower on the totem pole.
You got to believe that. Yeah. You got to believe that.
Yep.
In looking into the place where Bolonis caught this fish, Terry, it was really cool. He caught it at a place called Samson's Pond. It's near a little town called Carver, Massachusetts. And I looked it up. And I checked it out on Google Earth and all that. This body of water is 302 surface acres.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, wow, that's awfully small. It has an average depth of about 8 feet, a maximum depth of about 16 feet. It's a natural body of water that has been enlarged by a dam to encompass greater surface area. But it got me doing a deeper dive into just how big are the bodies of water that produce state records around the country. And one of these days we're going to have to do an episode on that, Terry, because tiny bodies of water churn out state record bass like crazy.
Well, I mean, you look at California, all those San Diego lakes they're tiny by comparison.
Well, they're not tiny like Samson Pond. When you say tiny about California lakes, you're talking about, Dixon is like 75 acres or something.
Yeah.
But Casitas, Castaic.
Well, Castaic, 1,600 acres. Casitas is 20.
Yeah, a lot of them are over 1,000 or 2,000 even.
Yeah. You have Miramar's 136 acres. Those San Diego lakes, Poway's, a couple hundred acres. They're just small lakes. But the difference between those lakes and the Samson Pond has to do with the average depth of 16, or the deepest depth is 16 feet. Whereas the average depth at Dixon is probably more like 30 or 40 feet.
Yeah.
So, and when you're living in an upper tier and you get these ice situations, you run the risk of losing oxygen in those depths of water, right? You've got no thermocline in the winter. Your coldest water a lot of the times is at the bottom, or the warmest water could be at the bottom, but at the bottom,
warmest water is at the bottom.
Yeah, and the coldest is at the top. But you have a problem with oxygen down at the bottom because of all the decay of all the vegetation. And so
you get a problem because there's no water stirring. Once the ice caps the lake, there's no circulation anymore.
Yeah, I mean, we used to have fish kills out at a place called Mud Lake in Idaho every 3 or 4 years because we'd just get this horrible freeze that wouldn't go away for months. And, spring thaw would come and all of a sudden, there's just fish everywhere. And
just suffocate the fish over a course of period time like that.
Which makes me wonder, I mean, this 15-pound fish, they say it was 14 years old. Wow, I mean, that's, it survived a lot.
It really did. Well, in researching this fish, I was surprised that even at 15.8, there's not a tremendous amount of what I'll call credible controversy about the fish.
Yeah.
The main controversy about the fish that I felt was credible had to do not with the size of the fish, not with where the fish, not with whether or not the fish was legitimately caught, but about where the fish may have come from. And I know you know something about that story too.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't believe that Bolonis actually caught it out at Samson's Pond. They think that body of water was not very fertile, didn't hold a lot of biomass. A lot of people think it came from somewhere else.
Yeah, Dunham's Pond, which is like 45 acres, and it's like, a mile away from Samson's Pond.
Exactly.
But do we know anything about the depth of that lake or?
I don't know much about that lake except that apparently the reports of Bolonis catching it from that lake are so reliable that even the state references it in their state records.
Wow.
Even the state says, it probably came from Dunham's Pond.
That's crazy. But, I mean, they say the lake was infertile, which means that, well, was it possibly like a rock quarry lake? Whereas, that's what the California lakes are like. They're considered infertile. You look at how clear the water is. You can see 40 feet down. There's no biomass in it. There's shad in them. Of course, there's, the stock candy bars, the trout.
I like that. The stock candy bars. I like it. Vitamin T. Yeah. And, so you look at those lakes and they're infertile, yet they produce these giant fish. So infertile, I don't think is a good parameter to be judging upon. If it's got, good perch, if it's got, maybe they have put and take trout there, nobody really knew, especially back east, that bass would eat trout. So I don't know. Yeah. I think we know bass will eat anything they can catch.
Yeah. Even their own kind. So
especially their own kind. But
there were a couple more big fish that came out of Massachusetts, right?
Yeah, there were. Nothing like Bolonis' 15.8, at least nothing like that up to that time, which is February 1975. In 1963, an angler named George Pastick caught the previous state record, which weighed 12 pounds, 1 ounce. And he caught that from Palmer River in May of 1963. And that fish weighed 12.1. So that's a giant fish in the teens. The previous best from all of New England. And by the way, Walter Bolonis' 15.8 is the biggest fish from New England, not just the biggest from Massachusetts, but the biggest from New England. But the previous best from New England had been a fish that weighed 12.14 out of Connecticut in 1961. I believe that was Frank Domurat.
So what I want to throw out there is that these are all northern strain bass. And the biggest northern that I had ever heard of was 14 pounds caught out of California.
Right.
A big northern is 10 pounds.
That's a huge northern bass. Yeah.
Yeah.
10 is crazy big. That's a fish of many lifetimes.
Yeah. It's insane. So, there's another thing that makes you wonder is that 15 pounder. I don't know. I mean, but there really is no controversy with this fish other than the fact that Department of Fish and Game in Mass thinks it came out of a different pond.
Yeah, they're at least lending a lot of credibility to the reports, which they call reliable.
Yeah.
It came not from Samson's Pond, but from Dunham's Pond, which is smaller and very close by.
Right.
Now, there was a very big fish recorded in 2013, Terry, that you and I know about. A retired Army sergeant named Briantuliano caught a fish out of Lake Wampanoag. I probably am butchering that name.
Yeah.
But in 2013, he caught a fish that reportedly weighed 14.2 pounds. We're going to show a picture of that fish. The claimed length is 28 inches. The claimed girth is more than 30 inches.
Yeah.
If you put it on Terry Battisti's Big Bass podcast calculator, that fish comes out at 20.36 pounds. And folks watching, folks listening, there is no frickin' way that fish weighed.
Well, you look at the picture.
14.2.
I mean, to me, it's the Leah True fish all over again. I mean, you look at that fish and you go, man, that thing might be 10. There's no way it has a 30-inch girth when you look at the length of it. A 30-inch girth, the thing would look like a basketball, right?
Absolutely.
And this fish looks like a long tubular fish from Florida. And in my estimate, if it weighed, 10, maybe 11 pounds, that would be the max.
I think 10 is a reach for that fish. It was weighed on a Berkeley digital scale. And the problem was, I believe that fish was caught on a Sunday, and a lot of Massachusetts certified scales or official weigh-in stations are closed on Sunday. That fish was released It was not kept, so it could be weighed a little bit later. The angler who caught it, Briantuliano, said, and I'm quoting here, as soon as it saw the boat, it headed for the bottom, and I could barely turn it. The fight lasted at least 10 to 15 minutes under the boat until I got to the surface.
Yeah.
I'm not a buyer on that. I do not believe that at all. Now, what's bizarre about this story, Terry, and I know you've read the coverage just as I have, was an outdoor writer named Mark Blazes, a highly respected outdoor writer in that area, apparently. He covered that fish, and he covered that story, and he absolutely fawned over this guy, Tuliano. And here's a quote from an article that the late Mark Blazes, he's since passed away, wrote. He said, "I was struck by Tuliano's extraordinary ethics and sportsmanship. His Goliath bass won't ever be listed in the official record book because of his failure to get it weighed officially. But he and his 1 in a million fish need to be recognized, each for their greatness.
Oh, God.
Tuliano is a true fishing champion in every sense of the word."
Because he let it go.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, I'd let a 10-pounder go just to claim it was 14.
Me too. But whereas you're a modest and reasonable person, Terry Battisti, I would have claimed 23, 24 pounds.
Yeah. We'll just start calling you Leah.
Now, just 2 years, that fish was allegedly caught in 2013. And it's a nice bass, caught in 2013. Nice fish. Ain't no way it's 14. 2 years after the Mark Blazes article on that Tuliano bass, Blazes wrote another article on Massachusetts' biggest bass of all time. He mentioned Bolonis' state record, of course, and he mentioned several other fish that weighed between 10 and 13 pounds, but he did not mention that Tuliano fish.
What happened?
Why not? Yeah, exactly. What happened?
Yeah.
What did he learn that soured him on that fish?
Monthly payments stopped happening? I mean, I don't know.
Well, Blazes died in 2021, so he can't tell us why he changed his mind about that fish, or appears to have changed his mind about that fish.
Yeah.
But he laid it on thick for Tuliano in 2013 and then seemed to forget all about him 2 years later.
Yeah. That right there says something, you know.
I think so. Yeah. I don't know what.
Yeah.
We're not going to speculate too much, but
exactly.
The Tuliano fish does not look 14 pounds to the guys here on the Big Bass Podcast.
Nope. Not at all. Not at all. So today, I mean, we still have a 15.8 remarkable fish that stands as the Massachusetts record bass. It's probably a record that will never be broken. Would you?
I'm with you, man. Obviously Massachusetts has some quality fish, but to beat 15.8 in New England, whew,
yeah, that's going to be tough. That's going to be tough.
Very tough. It's a very old record now. You know, obviously when Bolonis caught it, it was the 5th largest state record out there. But you know, we're talking about almost 50 years have passed since then, and now it's the 12th oldest state record.
Yeah, yeah, and just to go over some, you know, possibly one of the reasons why Tuliano or whatever the heck was name, Tuliano, you know, didn't weigh his fish. He would have had to kill it because Massachusetts has got some weird regulations, right? We went through this in the orgs, you know, deal, but go ahead and remind people, you know, what Mass's record or regs are.
Yeah, let's put a link up to that other episode of ours so that folks can check that out. It's about the record-keeping organizations and some of the weird rules around the country for the state records. But yeah, first of all, the Massachusetts Mass Wildlife offices are still closed to the public due to COVID, at least according to the website.
Yep.
You got to email Stephen Maddox. That's STEVEN Stephen Maddox MATTOCKS at mass.gov if you want to make an appointment to bring your fish to one of their offices. That fish must be dead. You're not allowed to transport live fish in Massachusetts. And you can try calling Mass Wildlife, but they're only open from Monday through Friday from 8 to 4. And don't catch your record during lunchtime because they're closed from noon to 12:30.
Yeah. Oh, goodness. Yeah, goofy. regulations. You know,
they are. Now, all right, Terry, I always like to put you on the spot at the end of our shows here. Give us your bottom line, your take, your takeaway from the Walter Bolonis state record Massachusetts largemouth of 15 pounds 8 ounces.
You know, so I really hadn't thought about this fish since I read it in Bassmaster magazine in 1975, and then in the last couple of weeks doing our research, and the knowledge that I've gained over the years regarding, you know, Florida fish and northern fish and, you know, living in the northern climes and, you know, it just seems impossible. A 15-pound, 8-ounce northern strain largemouth. I'd love to hear from some fisheries biologists to see if that is the biggest documented northern strain largemouth. It would have to be. Is it possible? I have more questions in my head now than I did 2 weeks ago when I started looking back at this fish. So I'm bewildered, to be honest with you. That's my response. Bewilderment.
I want to believe everything about this catch is legit. I want to believe everything about it's legit because it is such an outlier coming from New England. But I cannot help think about this fish anymore without thinking of our friend Brandon Palaniuk, the great Bassmaster Elite Series angler, two-time Bassmaster Angler of the Year as we record this show. Who knows, maybe he has 5 AOIs by the time you folks are seeing or listening. But I ran into Brandon at a Bassmaster Classic Expo after he had been eliminated from competition, and we get to talking, and I said to him, Brandon, what would you do if you won the Classic? And he said, I'd probably retire and travel around the country breaking one state record after another. And I said, dude, you'll never get to 1. And I said, but if you try it, promise me you'll start in Massachusetts.
Oh yeah, that's mean. Why are you so mean, Ken? I mean,
I love Brandon Palaniuk.
You want to see him die in Massachusetts? I mean, golly, he'd never get back to Idaho, where he's a born and bred Idahoan. Golly.
I got to believe you spent 1,000 lifetimes in Massachusetts trying to break that record.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, with all due respect to Brandon Palaniuk, who just might get it done in a week. Who knows? He's that good. It's time to slam the door on this episode of the Big Bass Podcast. I'm Ken Duke, and on behalf of my partners Terry Battisti and Nathan Benson, thank you so much for joining us. If you enjoyed our program, please rate, share, review, all that good stuff. And if you'd like to contact us, our email addresses are ken@thebigBassPodcast.com, Terry@thebigBassPodcast.com, and Nathan@thebigBassPodcast.com. Be sure to check back next week. We'll have a new show about a different big bass with information that you will not and cannot find anywhere else. We guarantee it.